Today I'm here to talk to you about something a little bit different to normal. Yes, we're still talking about Anglo-Saxons, but today I've come to the village of Hollywell in Cambridgeshire to talk to you about the pub that you can see behind me, the Old Ferryboat Inn. Now this pub makes several claims to fame. To begin with, it claims to be the oldest pub in England. It claims to have been serving ale since 560 AD. That's a very long time ago, and it claims to be listed in the Domesday Book. Now, perhaps its biggest claim to fame is that this pub claims to be haunted by an Anglo-Saxon ghost called Juliet Choley. So we're here in the village of Hollywell. We're right out in the Fens here, right on the edge of the river Great Ouse, which is very flooded at the moment. Now, Hollywell is originally an Anglo-Saxon village. There's been settlements here since Roman times at least, and probably a lot older. And it's named the way it is due to a spring which rises in the village, which has probably been revered for many thousands of years. Now, years ago, the pub used to operate a ferry which would take people and goods from here across the Fen Drayton, across the other side of the Great Ouse. And one of its other claims to fame is that the Anglo-Saxon freedom fighter Hereward the Wake escaped from the Normans on this ferry. So what do we actually know about this ghost? Well, there has been a legend of a ghost materialising in this pub, which is very old. This story possibly goes back a few hundred years. More recently, in 1953, parapsychologist Tony Cornell and a team of investigators came to this pub to investigate the story. During the course of their investigation, they used a Ouija board, and they came up with the information that the lady in question was a young woman named Juliet Choley, who had died in 1050. This places her firmly in the late Anglo-Saxon period. Now, their investigations came up with the information that Juliet had killed herself after being rebuked by the man that she loved, a handsome woodcutter by the name of Thomas Zool, and that she was then buried at a crossroads, which now is under this current building. Now, this building here behind me is 17th century, but it's said that there's been a pub there since Anglo-Saxon times. Now, the interesting thing is that the names that the research group came up with, well, they were not able to find any records of anybody by those names in this area at the time, although of course we are talking a very long time ago. But the other interesting thing is the name Juliet and the name Thomas are not names that were used during the Anglo-Saxon period. They were names used later in the Middle Ages. So I thought it would be interesting to come here. There is this legend, and in later years this legend has almost been taken as fact, and throughout the pub you can see lots of signs telling us the story about Juliet and her love for Thomas. I thought it would be interesting to come here, as I wondered how long ago it was anybody actually spoke Old English in this pub, and if there is possibly a ghost here, whatever her name may be, who is of Anglo-Saxon origin, then maybe it would be interesting to try and speak some Old English within this pub and see what happens. So here, about half a mile from the Old Ferryboat Inn, we see the spring which has given its name to this village. Now, the village's name has remained unchanged for a long time. In a Domesday Book it was listed as Hollywell. Now, it's quite probable that this sacred spring has been a place of veneration and worship for a long time. Roman artifacts were found here, and then just to my left here on this hill we have the church of St John the Baptist in a rather commanding position with views across the Great Ouse, which lies here to my right. So I'm now inside the Old Ferryboat Inn. Obviously it's a pub, it's early evening, so it's a little bit noisy in here, so I hope you can actually hear what I'm saying above the usual noise of a pub. So we're sitting quite close to the slab, which is reputed to be the grave of the ghost, and it's said to be where the apparition of the woman dressed in white appears on the 17th of March and points to the slab on the floor. So I'm going to try and speak some Old English and see whether this has any effect on the activity in the pub. Ela, good avond, glad day to metena. Min name is Sharon. Ich onnedia on West Saxon, ach ich volblora on Fordham, hit is nerich. Ich hierde sin talu. Ich denke hit is sweet for Joseph. Through woldest that hina Ludofest day. Each Saria. Ich kom specken va edle tunga for them ich hoppa they tatan. Ich wheeler that through here. Ich danke bei farewell, good meat. Well, I don't know whether it's just my imagination, but it did feel a little bit like the atmosphere in here shifted slightly, but then it could just be my overactive imagination. Who knows? But we'll see what happens over the course of the evening. Might throw a little bit more Old English into the mix throughout the evening. And yeah, if nothing else, it's been great to visit this old pub back in my native Cambridgeshire. Going to be moving further east tomorrow onto Sutton Hoo to explore the sacred landscape around the Deben Valley and the whole Sutton Hoo area. So on a bit of an Anglo-Saxon pilgrimage. So we thought we'd start here in this pub. As I said, claims to have been serving ale since 560. So certainly be raising a glass to any spirits of any Anglo-Saxons that happen to still be lingering in this place tonight. Good night. So I'm back in my home now on West Saxon, or in Somerset to me and you, and I've had some time to reflect upon my visit to the Old Ferryboat Inn in Hollywell. Now I think the fact that this story has endured for such a long time, that this legend has been around for a very long time, would suggest that there is some substance to it. I think if there hadn't have been, then maybe it would have just vanished, just faded away and been lost over the years, but it has still persisted. Now, without a doubt, after I spoke Old English in the Old Ferryboat Inn, I most definitely did perceive what I can only describe as a shift in the atmosphere. I felt a definite shift. It's very difficult to describe, but it was definitely, I definitely felt it. And also, after I'd spoken the Old English, I did feel very emotional. It did seem to affect me quite a lot. Now, I am a very sensitive person. I always have been, possibly too sensitive. And I have, over the years, had a number of incidents which could only be described as paranormal. Now, I'm not a paranormal investigator, and I didn't go to the Old Ferryboat Inn armed with, paranormal investigation equipment such as EVPs, etc., etc. And I do wonder whether, even if I had an EVP, with the amount of noise, there was a fair amount of racket going on in that pub that night, with some of the clientele making more than their fair share of noise. But I do wonder whether, with all of that background noise, whether anything would have been detectable anyway. But I do think it was an interesting experiment, to go and actually speak that old language, which probably hadn't been heard in that pub for hundreds of years. The Anglo-Saxon period ended in 1066, and then over the preceding years the language changed up until a point where it is quite different now to how it was in 1050. So I do think it was an interesting experiment, and maybe if someone was to go back there and actually have the proper equipment and combine that with speaking Old English, then maybe the results would have been more concrete than my own perceived feelings at that time. Now, I did actually pick up a copy of this book, this classic book, The Gazetteer of British Ghosts by Peter Underwood, first published in 1971. And he does have an entry in here about Hollywell, and it was something that he investigated himself. And I think it's fair to say that his write-up on this has been somewhat embellished, even down to the point of the colour of the dress that she was wearing when she hung herself. He concludes the section by saying, "This is a ghost which everyone knows about, but few have seen. There are certainly some very odd happenings here. The landlord told me in 1965, quite inexplicable. There is, for instance, a dog that will not go near the gravestone, and of course the local women don't come near the inn on March the 17th. So really, I do think it's a case with the Old Ferryboat Inn. When the legend becomes truth, print the legend. Until next time.